Welcome, everybody. We are back for another episode of Indie Reads Aloud. This is a storytelling podcast where we invite authors to come in and read a little bit for you. So maybe you will find them as your next favorite read. Today, Michael Beardslee is on the program, and he's going to read a little bit for us. Thank you for coming, Michael. I appreciate you being here.
I'm glad to be involved. Thank you very much for letting me be involved.
Of course, yeah. For those of you who don't know Michael, he is currently retired after 34 years of working in the auto insurance industry claims world, with the majority of that time being spent as a field trainer. He has lived in the state of Michigan his entire life, mainly in Livingston County. He currently resides in Brighton and West Branch, Michigan, with his wife, Terese Fitzpatrick, and Molly, their golden retriever. Michael was born in Flint, Michigan, and graduated from Fenton High School. He has a BME degree from Eastern Michigan University. Today, Michael is going to read from his second book in the White Lake Road Chronicles called The Fenton Mafia. And this is fictionalized memoir. Usually, when we talk about memoir, we talk about true to life events. And in this case, Michael has taken a little bit of a genre called creative nonfiction and mixed it with his memoir to create a fictional memoir. Michael, I guess my biggest question for you is, how did you decide what pieces of your writing were going to be true to fact and what pieces you were going to gently embellish?
I took a specific event from my real life. This is an example tonight when their band float was protected.
Okay.
So there's a real situation with a band float, and then brought it more into the fictionalized memoir. So I'll allude to a real event, but we'll focus on the fictionalized event for tonight.
Okay, so when you were writing, how did you make the decision which events you were going to fictionalize and which events you were going to keep true to reality?
The real event took place during my sophomore year of high school. For reading tonight, now I'm a senior in high school. So I just alluded to that, referred back to that, and that's how that was the example to use for the real example of, now let me back up. The real example took place in 1967. The fictionalized example took place in 1969. So I just embellished from what happened in 1967 and made it more current for this story.
Okay. Well, I'm really interested to hear what you did with this. So, but before you get started with your reading, we do want to make listeners aware, for those of you who have little ears listening to the program today, you might want to preview this episode before you share it with those little people. We do have a listener advisory today for some light violence. So just so everyone is aware of that. Michael, when you are ready, please take the microphone and read aloud.
Okay, here we go. On this Thursday morning, I had noticed something was troubling my pal, Terry Rodebolt, of which I was soon to become aware of what was making him so quiet and uptight. Upon entering Heartland High School, just as we were walking past Principal Thompson's office, my high school band buddy cleared his throat and said, "Hey, Beardslee, I need to talk to you for a second in private." He took a few seconds to spit out what he wanted to advise me of before finally stating, "I heard this rumor floating around the school all day yesterday, and I'm convinced that there is a lot of truth to it. Gospel truth, kind of. The band float is going to be attacked tonight." Now, I got to admit that I took a couple of deep breaths, gulps of air before I started to fully comprehend what he had just advised me. When I was still at Fenton High School, the trashing of a float the night before the homecoming parade was not an uncommon occurrence. In fact, it was almost a tradition, much like the school bonfire on the eve of the homecoming football game. However, just 2 years ago, I vividly remember the look of panic on my trumpet-playing friend Guy Thompson's face with his eyes all wide and excited, practically bulging out of his glasses when he approached me before the start of a school day and said almost verbatim to me what Ken Rodwell had recently stated. I've heard more than once since yesterday that the band float is going to be attacked and torn to bits tonight, and we have to take steps to protect it. So I'm an old pro when it comes to protecting band floats. There was no scoffing on my part this morning of the message I had just received. I took what Terry Rodenbow had told me very, very seriously. Just before school officially got started at 8 a.m., Terry Rodenbow, Katie, and I met with our band director, Mr. Granderson, where I proceeded to give him the Reader's Digest version of the rumors that the band float was going to be trashed tonight. I stated Jim Coop and I have some experience with this type of issue from just a couple years ago when a member of the Fenton High School band caught wind about a rumor that the band float was to be vandalized. 4 guys, including myself and Jim Coop, decided it was time to best that we spend the night in the family's barn and protect our hard-earned efforts. That decision paid off as some well-placed thrown apples at 4 visitors caused them to vacate the premises, and the band float was saved. So my recommendation is that some volunteers, specifically myself, Jim Coop, and Terry Rodenbow, repeat what was done 24 months ago in Fenton. I feel this is necessary because what I can tell is that there's nothing about the Andrews pole barn where the band float is being built that indicates you can either lock or secure it in any fashion. Anybody could simply walk in there, destroy it, or even worse, steal the band float. I'm sure that Mr. Granderson had better things in life to do than worry about the band float being vandalized. However, he was smart enough to realize how hard us band kids had worked on it. As my sister pointed out, this is an excellent band float that is worthy of first prize award. I would hate to see us not have the opportunity to show off the effort that we have put into it for tomorrow's parade. I stated, if you could get permission from Mrs. Andrews to let us band kids spend the night in their pole barn protecting the band float, that would be great. That's probably all we need from her. Mr. Granderson shook his head in agreement, but warned, I have dealt with Mrs. Andrews for years now. I have a pretty good idea where she'll be coming from when I ask this request. I'll try to get a hold of her prior to band class, then the 4 of us can either talk then or after rehearsal. She will probably not allow any of you on her premises outside of the original time frame that was agreed upon for working on the band float. No surprise there. Later that day, Mr. Granderson advised, in recapping my conversation with Mrs. Andrews, I advised her of the rumor that the band float was going to be vandalized tonight. In order to prevent this from taking place, 3 young men from the Heartland Senior Band were volunteering to spend the night in your pole barn, with your permission, of course, to protect the band float from any potential attackers. And do we have her consent to do this? That request did not go over very well, as Mrs. Andrews not only told me that no one was spending the night in her pole barn, she also stated, I'm getting sick of this whole band float business. And if that band float is not off my property within 30 minutes from the time she and I concluded this telephone conversation, then she herself was going to take a match for the band float and burn it into crispy little critters. I thought to myself, that's real mature. Mr. Granderson, after a few pregnant pauses to collect himself, added, so at the end of our telephone dialogue, Mrs. Andrews and I reached the following agreements. 1, anyone who protects the band float can only stay there till 10 p.m. 2, that once the band float leaves the Andrews pole barn tomorrow for the homecoming parade, Mrs. Andrews refuses to let it come back on her property. I know that you kids are going to have a cleanup party for the band float on Saturday night. That is not out of the window, and we'll have to find a new location for the band float at some point after the parade and football game are over. I was not particularly happy with this information I just received from Mr. Granderson. All he did with that old hag was to pick up 1 more hour than we normally there to work on the band float in the first place. My own thoughts on the facts presented to us were this. Point number 1, the amount of time that we can spend protecting the band float tonight was totally inadequate. 2 years ago, when the unknown band float saboteurs showed up to do their thing, it was roughly between 11 o'clock and midnight. Pretty much a perfect time for most people are asleep or seriously drowsing off to WJR radio personality Captain Jay Roberts, Night Flight 760, with his background sound of a jet to some destination. Based upon that comparison and the restricted guidelines that were being held to by Mrs. Andrews, the 3 of us guardians of the band float will be gone for at least 1 to 2 hours before any raid on the pole barn even takes place. That is not a good sign, because I don't see any of tonight's unknown potential attackers being stupid enough to do the following: finish their supper around 7 o'clock, push themselves away from the supper table, then in a very loud voice, "Hey, Ma, I'm going out to wreck the band float. I'll be back in an hour, so save me that last piece of pie." The band float is going to be a sitting duck. I just know it. If this project of ours is vandalized, then that will mean for the second consecutive band float season under the command of you-know-who, that a first place finish was not to be. And what is really bothersome about the fact is that this year's band float is first rate. I mean, we are talking biblical proportion types of first rate here. I was going to have to do some quick thinking by the time the school was over. I was heading to the Jeep. During the previous documented conversation with Mr. Granderson about the defense of the band float, there was only the mention of 3 gentlemen hanging out the Angels pole barn until 10 p.m. Totally absent was the mention of any other parties joining us, specifically Katie. Now, the $64,000 question, of which I had to come up with an answer by the time I entered into the Jeep, is to whether or not having Katie with us tonight was even a viable option. Mainly were the 3 of us putting her in harm's way. Well, there's 2 ways to answer that question. The first response is possibly. But come on, you have read enough about Katie and know that there's no way anyone, a super comic book character, or even a representative of the Russian KGB, was going to keep my younger sister away from protecting her band float. And guaranteed, there is no way that the 3 of us were going to allow anything to happen to her either. Even though we will fall short, a total of 3 short of the magnificent membership that I like to do battle with when I'm pretending to be side by side, shooing away flies from a small Mexican village with Yul Brynner, Steve McQueen, Charles Bronson, James Colburn, Robert Vaughn, Brad Dexter, and Horst Buchholz. 4 was the number of participants used the last time I was involved in the defense of a band float. And that is the number we will go with tonight in round 2 of Protectors of the Band Float. I also readily admit that I had a couple of reasons for wanting Katie on guard with us tonight. 1, she thinks fast on her feet, and that might come in handy. Secondly, if the 4 of us ever live through these 180 minutes, Katie can spin a pretty good yarn. When she tells this story to the Heartland Band kids during 4th hour tomorrow, I can guarantee you this: it will be done with such a high level of enthusiasm that this quartet of bodyguards will be the first ballot selections into Band Float Hall of Fame by the end of our next marching band rehearsal. And since this is the second time that Jim Coop and I have been through the world of band float defense, he and I will undoubtedly have our own individual wings in this soon-to-be constructed prestigious building, site to be determined at a later date. Despite the fact that the 4 of us kids were only going to be there for 3 hours, there was still a lot of planning and strategizing to do. As I mentioned earlier to Mr. Granderson, this building did not have any type of locks or way to secure the east and west entrance sliding doors. Anybody that really wanted to could simply walk into this pole barn, slide open one of these doors, stroll right in, and do anything they darn well pleased to the band float. War plans were being developed on the drive to White Lake Road. Terry Roadbow suggested we stop off at French's Orchard and grab a couple bags of apples. It was decided that Jim Coop and I would guard the west end of the pole barn, and that was the most likely point of entry, with it being closest to the driveway and road. Terry Rodenbow and Katie would guard the east entrance. It's good to see that after watching 152 episodes of the TV series Combat, in addition to listening to just one great TV theme song every Tuesday night, is finally starting to pay off. The second set of weapons that we'll use tonight are 2 wiffle ball bats that I had to do some serious scrounging around Beardslee's barn to locate. As a 6th grader, I named these bad boys after Chip Hilton and Norm Cash, the latter being my favorite Detroit Tiger player of all time. Using my best Sergeant Saunders thinking, a major character from the Combat TV series, is that each defense group will get 1 bat. With any sort of luck, any mystery persons initially entering into the darkness of the pole barn will see either of my 2 best buddies, Chip Hilton and Norm Cash, instinctively think that they are rifles and run home to their mamas. Add 2 flashlights so we don't get lost in the pole barn, and supplies-wise, we are cooking with gas. The last bit of tactics we will employ is that any attackers start to slide open either barn door open, Katie would quickly turn on the lights, and we then start bombing the trespassers with apples. If the vandals are not expecting any bodyguards for the band float, they might think twice about proceeding with their planned destruction of our labors and just retreat out of there like all get out. I realize that this is not the equivalent of the defense plan that Yul Brynner established when the evil bandit Calvera and his men came riding into a small hamlet to collect food for the winter to feed his men. However, I just would not be able to look into the eyes of my fellow bandmates if the four of us did nothing to try and protect the band float tonight, especially if there's not even a small inkling that we knew it could be attacked. After getting everything stowed away and stuffing some supper into my stomach, it was back to Heartland, Michigan for the defense of the band float. Deep down inside of me, did I really think that any action was going to take place between the hours of 7 and 10 p.m.? No, not at all. My prediction, however, was that 10 seconds after we exit the Andrews driveway to go back to White Lake Road, any visitors with some cruel intentions on their mind, that is when they will make their actual presence known. Just a few minutes after 7 p.m., I was a little jittery when we first settled into Fort Banflow. I heard a car door slam and I about jumped out of my skin. I looked out a side window of the pole barn and saw the entire Andrews family was getting into their motor vehicle and taking off somewhere. I don't know why, but I thought it was strange, them leaving the non-Heartland Consolidated school kids all by our lonesome on the Andrews property. I mean, it's not like Mrs. Andrews liked or even trusted any of us. Weird. At 9 p.m., the pole barn lights were turned off, giving the impression that any work on the band float had been halted and everyone was gone for the night. My thoughts about whether the Detroit Lions could beat the visiting Green Bay Packers this upcoming Sunday were suddenly interrupted for the second time this evening. I heard a car door slam. In fact, if my hearing was not playing tricks on me, I think I heard more than one door slam. Jim Coop and I scurried over to the side window, and there's no indication at all that the Andrews car was back on their premises. No closing of a garage door, no lights coming out of the house, or anything else suggesting that a family had just arrived home and was settling in for the evening. We both looked out toward the road, and despite the fact there was very little of assistance from the moon, light-wise, it looked like to me that there were at least 4 or 5 human forms making no effort to hide where they were heading. And I might add, acting like they knew exactly where they were going by walking straight towards the pole barn with no hesitation at all on their part. I whispered to the rest of the defenders, "You got company." The west end of the pole barn opened up to one humongous loud screeching sound. It never dawned on me how loud a pole barn scraping against a cement floor could make, especially in the dead of night out in the middle of the country. Jim Coop and I then heard the same exact noise from behind us when the opposite end of the pole barn door was sliding across its portion of the floor. Jim Coop whispered, "This is just great, Beardslee. We're being attacked in stereo." And that is when the defense of the band float began. Katie immediately turned on the electrical lights in the pole barn, and all 4 of us were starting the pelting of apples at our designated targets. With the lights coming on and getting struck by thrown apples at close range, despite the fact that the opposition was wearing Halloween-type masks to cover their faces, it was rather obvious from their body language, stopping dead in their tracks, not making any forward advances to the band float, that this quintet had not anticipated anyone to be stationed in the pole barn tonight. The coup de grace that caused our visitors to vamoose was when Jim Coop yelled out, "Get me my dad's shotgun, Roadbolt." Now, it was a complete ad lib on Jim Coop's part, but it was an effective one. As one of the trespassers yelled in a muffled type of voice, "They've got a shotgun. Let's get out of here." We saw the invaders start to vacate the pole barn almost as soon as they had entered. One person, however, while making his escape, tripped over their own 2 feet and fell to the cement surface. I got brave all of a sudden and grabbed my trusty wiffle ball bat, the one named Norm Cash, and took after this individual to see if I could capture this unknown person who was starting to scramble to his feet. I was probably only a couple feet away, and while twirling the wiffle ball bat over my head, yelled, "I'll teach you to attack my sister's band float." With me taking direct aim at the assailant's rib, I then proceeded to swing the plastic bat with the same exact might that the great baseball player Babe Ruth exhibited when swinging and missing at a pitched baseball. And I bet you I missed this target by a good 2 feet. And with this intense swinging motion on my part, I immediately felt a sharp knife-like twinge of pain in my ribs. I mean, my vocal cords screamed about as loud as Agent 99 does for the TV show Get Smart. I was in super agony. I thought I was home free from any battle maneuvers and hurting myself further. But then I saw my opposition bend over and pick up what looked like a wood stick or maybe even a metal pipe, close in on me and get ready to develop me a good one. I immediately thought to my trumpet playing self, no, please no, any place but the lips. I then swung the wiffle ball bat in my defense to see if I could knock the unknown club out of my attacker's right hand. I initially missed with this undetermined handheld object, but I was targeting. With a second effort, I made contact with this unknown person. My standard Norm Cash Banfloat issue defense weapon, also known in the Banfloat defense circles as the NCBFDW Model 1, struck what I believe to be the left cheekbone area of the attacker's face, bringing a loud yelp of pain. This time was from somebody else instead of me. The fool must have had enough because he started to hightail it away from the barn. I wanted to follow this individual to see if I could identify them. However, my attempt to achieve the spring-like action of a cheetah that I am famous for, and books will someday be written about, it was my turn to fall down onto the floor as a result of slipping on a smashed apple, now causing my left shoulder area to hurt like the dickens. The enemy escaped with no further whooping on the part of my Model 1 defense weapon being inflicted on their body. Lucky for them, because I don't think I could take any more of the pain I seemed to be laying on myself. I got back to my feet to search outside the pole barn area, but the opponent had fled. I looked back towards the pole barn, and luckily there was nothing like the concluding classic fight scene out of the outstanding movie, The Adventures of Robin Hood, where the Normans and Saxons are just beating each other to a pulp. So my humble opinion, the worst was over for the protectors of the Banfloat. Man, but I just keep being in the wrong place at the wrong time when I felt something whiz about 6 inches from my right ear. I initially thought it might be a bat circling over me. Then, bam, bam, I was struck in the chest area by some type of projectile. I leaned to pick up what had just struck me. It was a lousy apple, a lousy French's Orchard's apple. It finally dawned on me that my old coal defenders were throwing apples at me. No, that was not part of the defense strategy we discussed earlier today, guys. I yelled at the three of them to stop flinging apples at me and finally made it back to the pole barn without any further bodily injury to myself. And given the insight of the structure I once over, I could tell that the Banfloat had survived what I was hoping that would only be the only assault of the night. From what Terry Rodenbow had mentioned, while I was outside being a running fool, they had heard the sound of a couple car doors slamming. So headlights come on and 2 cars take off. The same great sounds that the original set of protectors of the Banfloat heard 2 Octobers ago. It appears that another attack on the Banfloat was averted, and the general consensus of us 4 happy troopers was there's not going to be anything in the way of a counterattack. I could just imagine some scared individual right this very moment speeding home to see if Ma had indeed saved them their last piece of pie. And there we are.
Thank you very much. That was super interesting. I have 2 questions for you. The first is, have any of the real people in your life read this book, and did they have any comments about it?
Yes. All the Fenton Mafia consists of real life people. One which recently died a few months ago in real life, but they liked it. They liked it a lot. What I might have done is maybe embellish their roles as from real life. So you talk about the difference between real life and what I made up. I made their roles more involved. Gave them more credit. Have you ever heard of Jack Benny?
Yeah.
The old I saw a documentary on him once where he said, when I have a guest star on, I, meaning Jack Benny, I'm the one that's going to get the pie in the face. I'm the one that's going to get the bucket of water spilled on me. I'm the one that's going to get blown up.
Yeah.
And that's the same approach that I've taken, tried to take. Anybody who's going to look stupid is going to be me. And so there, I try to make them more involved and, terrible to say, maybe a little bit better than what real life proved.
My second question is, where did you get the title for this book? The Fenton Mafia sounds a little ominous. How did you decide on that title?
Used to read a lot of books about John F. Kennedy, and he referred to his close counsel. They were referred to as the Irish Mafia. So if
Okay.
it's good enough for John F. Kennedy, it's good enough for Mike Beardslee.
Okay, that sounds like fair beans right there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
The funny thing is, Diana, at the point in this story, the Fenton Mafia name has not been established. It's comes in a couple chapters later.
Okay.
But no, so I thought it was a neat nickname. I thought it'd make
Okay.
a good chapter name.
Awesome. And then in the show notes, I have here that there are going to be 10 books in this series. How many have you written so far?
Oh, 7. The rough draft of number 7's done, and that will be next.
So,
And then
so you've published 6 so
so
far?
yeah.
Awesome. Okay, very cool. Well, we look forward to having you back on the program to read again. Thanks so much for coming out tonight, Michael. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks for having me, Diana. You take care.
You're
See
welcome.
you the
Bye-bye.
28th.
Absolutely.